Was it, bro, what are you doing? Or was it,
No.
bro, what are you doing?
Yeah, just like
Bro.
Some crimes announce themselves loudly, others unfold in silence, behind locked doors, in places where nothing bad is supposed to happen. This is one of those cases. It begins in a quiet neighborhood, where the biggest concerns are usually snow on the driveway or lights left on too late. A place where parents feel safe enough to go on vacation, where young couples plan ordinary nights without fear. And then, in the middle of that calm, something goes catastrophically wrong. A phone call cuts off mid-sentence. Two cell phones fall silent. A house stands lit from the inside, untouched from the outside. Hours pass. Warnings are raised. Authorities come and go. And when the truth finally forces its way inside, it reveals a scene so deliberate, so calculated, that even veteran investigators struggle to comprehend it. This is not just a story about a double murder. It's about the moments that didn't add up, the evidence that pointed in different directions, the DNA that didn't belong to the person convicted. It's about a case where one man sits in prison for life, while science quietly suggests that the full truth has never been told. And it's about a question that refuses to fade with time, one that still echoes more than a decade later. Who else was there that night? The night of January 30th, 2011, began like hundreds of others before it. Quiet, ordinary, unremarkable. Snow from earlier in the week still lined the streets of Holland, Ohio, but the roads were clear, the houses dark and calm. Longacre Lane sat tucked inside an affluent suburb where violent crime was rare enough to feel abstract, something that happened elsewhere, to other people. Inside one of those homes, two young lives were unfolding in the way young lives often do. Casually, without fear, without any sense that time was about to run out. Johnny Clarke was 21 years old and deeply connected to everyone around him. His phone was rarely silent. Friends, family, acquaintances, Johnny moved easily between worlds, and his call log showed it. On that Sunday alone, he would place or receive more than 50 calls. That wasn't unusual. Johnny was social, magnetic, the kind of person who anchored a group just by being present. His mother, Mady, called him constantly, not because she didn't trust him, but because that was how love worked in their family. He always answered, always reassured her. Earlier that evening when she checked in, he laughed and told her he was fine. Those words would stay with her forever. Lisa Straub was 20 years old and came from a very different background. Her life had been steady, structured, predictable. A close family, a safe neighborhood. Parents who had been married for decades and were, that very night, on a cruise celebrating their 25th anniversary. Lisa was responsible, independent, and determined. She worked at TGI Fridays, saved her money, and was figuring out her future one step at a time. When Johnny and Lisa came together, it wasn't seamless. They came from different worlds. People noticed that. Some worried. But those close to them saw something genuine. Young love that was imperfect, but real. The kind built on late-night conversations, shared plans, and the belief that tomorrow would always come. That Sunday evening, the plan was simple. Lisa finished her shift at work. Johnny picked her up around 10 p.m., and they drove back to her parents' house on Longacre Lane. They planned to watch the Pro Bowl, play pool in the basement, maybe order pizza later. Friends were supposed to stop by. Nothing about the night felt dangerous. But somewhere beyond that quiet street, a lie was already in motion. A rumor had been spreading through Toledo, passed casually, recklessly, without proof. The story was that there was a safe inside the Straub home, a safe filled with $100,000 in cash. It wasn't true, not even close. There was no safe, no fortune, just $40 left behind for food. Johnny and Lisa had no idea that this false story existed, no idea it had reached the wrong ears, no idea that it had turned their home into a target. At 10:41 p.m., Johnny's phone rang. On the other end was his friend Tiffany Williams. The call didn't start the way Johnny usually answered. There was no greeting, no laughter. His voice exploded with anger. "Bro, what are you doing?" He repeated it, louder, sharper. Then, "Who the hell are you?" Tiffany heard another male voice in the background. Johnny's tone suggested recognition, at least of one person, but there was someone else there. Someone unexpected. Someone who didn't belong. Johnny told Tiffany he'd call her back. The line went dead. That was the last confirmed contact Johnny Clarke would ever have. Over the next several hours, his phone rang again and again. Friends called. Texts went unanswered. Tiffany and another friend drove to the house. The lights were on. No one answered the door. They assumed Johnny and Lisa were ignoring them and left, uneasy but not alarmed enough to force the issue. Mady felt it immediately. When her son didn't answer, instinct took over. At 1:21 a.m., she called 911 and asked for a welfare check. Deputies arrived, walked the perimeter, looked through windows. The television was on. There were no footprints in the snow, no visible forced entry. Legally, they had no cause to go inside. They left. Still, the phone stayed silent. At 2:27 a.m., Mady called again. This time, she drove to the house with family members. Deputies returned and searched for more than 20 minutes. Again, nothing that gave them the authority to break in. Before leaving, one officer pulled Johnny's father aside. As a police officer, he said, "I can't tell you to go inside. As a parent, I would wait until we leave, then go in." When the cruisers pulled away, Johnny's father circled to the back of the house. Through the blinds, he saw something on the kitchen floor, a body, a phone lying nearby. He ran to the front and kicked the door in. What waited inside would shatter everything that came after. Inside the house, the silence was overwhelming. The lights were still on. The television still glowed. Nothing about the scene suggested chaos from the outside. But the moment Johnny's father stepped into the kitchen, reality collapsed. Johnny lay motionless on the cold tile floor. A plastic bag had been pulled over his head and sealed tightly with duct tape around his neck. His hands were bound. His feet were taped together. 3 feet away lay Lisa. Her hands were duct taped behind her back. Another plastic bag was wrapped around her head, sealed just as tightly. Her body was still. But there was something worse. As Johnny's father rushed toward them, he could hear it, the faint crinkling sound of plastic. Lisa had still been alive moments earlier, desperately trying to breathe. He tore the bag from Johnny's head, then ran to Lisa and ripped hers away, preparing to perform CPR. But as he lifted Johnny's body, the truth became undeniable. They were already gone. At 3:47 a.m., the nightmare became official. When first responders arrived, even seasoned professionals struggled to process what they were seeing. The method of killing was unlike anything most of them had encountered. Plastic bags, duct tape, no gunshots, no stabbing, no blood-soaked struggle. Just suffocation. Slow, intentional, and terrifyingly intimate. The medical examiner would later confirm that either the plastic bags or the tape around the necks could have caused death within minutes. The killers hadn't rushed. They had taken their time. Johnny's wallet had been removed and placed deliberately on his stomach, empty. It wasn't theft for convenience. It was a message, a signature, something meant to be seen. But the true story of what happened that night was written upstairs. The master bedroom looked as if a tornado had torn through it. The mattress had been ripped off the bed, dressers overturned, drawers yanked out and dumped. The attic access panel was open, insulation disturbed. Closets were emptied. Cabinets throughout the house had been pulled open. Lisa's purse was completely dumped out. It looked like chaos, but it wasn't random. Valuables were left behind. Jewelry sat untouched. Envelopes containing foreign currency were ignored. If this had been a simple burglary, those items would have vanished. The attackers weren't grabbing whatever they could. They were searching for something specific. A safe. A safe that did not exist. Investigators began to piece together how the night likely unfolded. Damage to the interior service door from the garage suggested Johnny had seen the intruders coming. He had likely tried to hold the door shut with his body, pushing back against them. At over 200 pounds, Johnny would not have been easy to overpower. The fact that the door was forced open suggested more than one attacker. Lisa's bedroom door told its own story. It was splintered, broken inward. She had barricaded herself inside while Johnny fought downstairs. Her cell phone was found in a different location, as if it had been torn from her hands. They dragged her out. Both victims showed signs of being moved and staged. Their clothing was disturbed, their bodies positioned deliberately in the kitchen. This was not panic. This was control. And then there was the cigarette. Near the garage service door, a deputy noticed a single cigarette butt on the ground. It stood out immediately. There was no smell of smoke in the house, no ash anywhere else. Someone had stepped outside, or lingered near the entrance, and left it behind. That small detail would change everything. The cigarette was sent to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. DNA testing revealed two profiles, two names, two people who had no legitimate reason to be inside that home. Investigators finally had something solid. As detectives worked outward, they began tracing Johnny's world, his friends, his disputes, his history. Johnny had lived on both sides of the line. He knew people involved in street activity. He had debts, disagreements, unresolved conflicts. But he was also trying to move forward. He talked about the future, about building something real with Lisa. Somewhere in that overlap between past and future, danger had been waiting. Interviews began. Stories shifted. Alibis changed. Text messages surfaced that chilled investigators to the bone. Messages sent after the murders that described duct tape, bindings, and death with unsettling precision. But the deeper detectives dug, the more complicated the case became. Because the DNA on the cigarette was only part of the picture. More DNA was found, on the duct tape around Johnny's ankles, on the tape around both of their necks, inside Johnny's clothing. Profiles that didn't match the suspects already identified. At least one unknown male. Multiple unknown female profiles. This wasn't a two-person crime. It never had been. And as the investigation moved forward, one terrifying truth became impossible to ignore. Someone out there knew exactly what happened inside that house, and had walked away while two young people suffocated on the floor. As the investigation expanded, detectives found themselves chasing a case that refused to stay contained. Every answer created two new questions. The DNA evidence was clear enough to point in a direction, but not clear enough to draw a full map. Someone had been inside the Straub home that night, more than one someone, and yet the scene had been scrubbed of almost everything that usually gives killers away. The cigarette butt became the first anchor. The DNA recovered from it matched two names already known to law enforcement. One of them was Sam Williams. The other was Cameo Petaway. Both men had connections to Toledo's street network. Both had indirect ties to people Johnny knew, and neither could offer a convincing reason for why their DNA would be present near the entry point of a home where two people had just been murdered. But even that wasn't enough. Detectives understood something immediately. If Sam Williams' DNA was at the scene, it did not automatically mean he acted alone. In fact, the opposite seemed more likely. The forced entry, the control of two victims in separate areas of the house, the length of time spent searching. This was coordinated. It required numbers. Interviews began almost non-stop. Friends, acquaintances, former associates, anyone connected to Johnny's orbit was questioned. One name kept resurfacing, Alex Casino. She had previously clashed with Johnny over money, a puppy, and a car deal gone bad. On its own, that meant little. But then investigators uncovered a text message she sent shortly after the murders. They get duct taped and tied up and left for dead. It was specific. Too specific. When questioned, Casino denied involvement. Her DNA did not match the unknown profiles found at the scene. The message alone wasn't enough to charge her, but it added to the growing sense that information about the crime was circulating far too freely for a case that was supposedly unknown to everyone involved. Another name followed close behind, Anthony Watson. According to multiple sources, Johnny had been expecting Watson at the house that night. Some said he was the person Johnny recognized during the 10:41 p.m. phone call. Watson's statements to police changed repeatedly. At times, he claimed ignorance. At other times, he hinted at knowing more than he was willing to say. Eventually, he named Sam Williams and described a woman who had allegedly placed herself at the scene. Then, quietly, Watson's own legal troubles began to disappear. A serious felony burglary charge was reduced to a misdemeanor. He was never called to testify. Years later, in 2018, Watson would be shot and killed outside his apartment in a murder that remains unsolved. For investigators, it felt like the case was bleeding into itself. Meanwhile, Sam Williams was arrested 8 months after the murders. When detectives sat him down, he denied knowing Johnny Clarke, denied knowing Lisa Straub, denied ever being inside the Straub home. But that denial created a problem he could not explain away. How does your DNA end up at a murder scene you claim you've never visited? Williams asked for a lawyer repeatedly. The interview ended, but the damage was already done. From jail, Williams made phone calls that prosecutors would later describe as admissions of guilt. In one, he told a relative he had messed up and would be locked up for a long time. In another, he spoke cryptically about someone else stepping in to take another person's place. Williams would later say those calls were taken out of context. Panic, drugs, fear. He insisted none of it had anything to do with murder. The jury would hear selected portions of those calls, not the full conversations, not the surrounding explanations. Then came the jailhouse informant. Eric Yingling was incarcerated on a minor charge when he claimed Sam Williams confessed to him late one night. Yingling told police that Williams described the killings in detail, including the sound of the plastic bag crinkling as Lisa tried to breathe. He named 3 people involved. He even mentioned Iraqi currency found in the home. It sounded damning, until it didn't. Investigators later learned that Yingling's wife had researched the case online. Many of the details he shared had already been made public. The Iraqi dinars, which prosecutors framed as secret knowledge, had been listed in a search warrant released to the media and discussed nationally. Yingling admitted he was hoping for leniency. He was paid thousands of dollars after testifying. Still, his words landed hard with a jury. Sam Williams was convicted in 2012 and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The death penalty was taken off the table. The court declared justice served, but the case refused to close. Cameo Petaway was tried separately. A judge ruled that the cigarette alone was insufficient evidence. His case was dismissed. He walked free. And the DNA, the unknown DNA, remained. Profiles from multiple individuals were still unidentified. Tape, clothing, skin contact. Evidence that did not belong to Sam Williams. Evidence that did not belong to Cameo Petaway. Evidence that said, unmistakably, more people were there. For the families, the verdict brought no peace. For investigators, it brought a different kind of certainty. Someone was missing from the story. And more than a decade later, that missing piece was finally beginning to speak. 13 years after the murders on Longacre Lane, the case still refuses to settle into silence. On paper, there is a conviction, a man serving life in prison, a courtroom that declared justice done. But beneath that surface, the evidence tells a far more complicated story, one that law enforcement itself has never denied. The DNA does not lie. Beyond the cigarette butt that tied Sam Williams to the scene, investigators found something far more unsettling: multiple unknown DNA profiles. On the duct tape used to bind Johnny and Lisa, on the tape wrapped around their necks, inside Johnny's clothing, at least one unknown male profile, several unknown female profiles. This was not secondary transfer. This was contact, presence, participation. Even detectives acknowledged the implication. More than one person took part in these murders. For years, traditional DNA testing reached its limits. Profiles were run through CODIS again and again with no results. The technology simply wasn't advanced enough to answer the most important question: who else was there? That changed in 2021. After renewed public attention and investigative reporting, the case was quietly reopened using modern genetic genealogy. The unknown DNA profiles were sent to Parabon Nanolabs, a private forensic company that works with ancestry databases rather than criminal ones. The involvement of genetic genealogist Cece Moore was a significant development. She does not enter cases unless there is something to work with: familial connections, partial matches, a path forward. In 2024, the Lucas County Sheriff's Office confirmed that Parabon had returned information. What that information contains has not been made public. But the fact that results exist is, in itself, telling. The remaining question is critical. Was the unknown DNA left by killers or by chance during tape manufacturing? That determination will change everything. If the DNA is linked to individuals present at the crime, then the official narrative collapses. It would mean people involved in one of the most brutal crimes in Ohio history have walked free for more than a decade. It would mean Johnny and Lisa's families were given only partial justice. Both families have never stopped pushing. Johnny's mother has been relentless, outspoken, and unwavering. She believes more people were involved. She believes the truth has been softened for convenience. Lisa's family has said the same thing in quieter words: that a life sentence for one man does not explain a crime that required coordination, time, and numbers. Even law enforcement agrees on one point. Someone out there knows exactly what happened. Someone who was present. Someone who helped plan it. Someone who stood by while 2 young people were bound, silenced, and left to suffocate on a kitchen floor. Time has not erased that knowledge. Fear may have buried it. Loyalty may have protected it. But conscience has a way of resurfacing, especially as technology closes the gaps that silence once protected. Johnny Clarke was 21. Lisa Straub was 20. They were not criminals. They were not targets by choice. They were victims of a lie that spread faster than the truth, and of people willing to act on it without hesitation. This case remains open, not officially closed, not forgotten. And if this story stayed with you, if it unsettled you, challenged you, or made you question how justice really works, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Keep these names alive. Like the video if you believe unanswered questions still matter. Subscribe to stay with us as this case continues to evolve. And turn on notifications so you don't miss what may come next. Because somewhere, someone still knows the truth about what happened on Longacre Lane. And one day, that truth will surface.